Welcome, dear listener. Tonight we embark on a gentle yet intellectually enriching journey into one of the most important and complex developments in the field of modern medicine: antidepressants. Before you get too comfortable and lost in the world of neurotransmitters and melancholy, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. That way other sleepless academics can go on these nightly journeys alongside you. Please also leave a comment about what time it is, where you are tuning in from, and what is keeping you awake tonight. It is lovely connecting with fellow listeners. Now I invite you to drift weightlessly into the world of mood-altering medication. Dim the lights and allow yourself to settle into a comfortable position. Let the weight of the day melt into your mattress. You're safe, still, and warm. With over 300 million people globally affected by depression, antidepressants have become one of the most widely prescribed categories of drugs in the world. But how do they actually work? Where did they come from? What do they do to the human brain, and what does the science truly say? In this episode we'll explore the ancient roots of mood-altering substances, the surprising accidental discoveries that led to modern antidepressants, the major types of antidepressants and how they interact with the brain, the role of neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and beyond, the scientific theories of depression, how antidepressants are tested, approved, and monitored, what brain imaging tells us about antidepressants, side effects, controversies, and the placebo effect, antidepressants versus therapy, the future of antidepressant treatment. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Ancient Roots of Mood-Altering Substances. The idea of using external substances to influence our internal emotional world is not a modern concept. In fact, civilizations for thousands of years have turned to nature's pharmacopoeia to manage moods and enhance the human spirit. Long before the word antidepressant ever existed, humans experimented with plants and potions in the hope of altering their emotional state. The desire to alleviate melancholy is not new, it's deeply ancient. In ancient Mesopotamia, healers combined herbal brews with spiritual rituals to cure what they described as sorrowful hearts. In ancient Mesopotamia, medical texts describe melancholia, an early term used to describe symptoms akin to modern depression. Treatments included a mix of prayers, ritualistic purifications, and plant-based concoctions. Ancient Egyptian texts also reference mood disturbances, which they attributed to demonic possession or imbalance of vital fluids. Treatment included opium-based remedies and incense. In Ayurveda, India's ancient medical tradition, depression was associated with imbalances in the three doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Treatments included herbal tonics like ashwagandha and brahmi, both known for their calming and mood-lifting effects. Ancient Greeks approached mental health from a more medicalized perspective. Hippocrates theorized that all human behavior stemmed from four bodily humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Hippocrates proposed that melancholia stemmed from an excess of black bile, one of the four bodily humours. Treatments involved lifestyle changes, music therapy, and baths. He emphasized that emotional disturbances had physical roots, a revolutionary notion for the time. Over in China, traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, viewed depression as a stagnation of qi, energy. Acupuncture, herbal medicine, and Tai Chi were employed to re-establish internal balance. They utilized herbal tonics like ginseng and licorice root to balance qi, life force energy, believed to influence emotional and physical health. These early systems may seem primitive by modern standards, but they laid the foundation for understanding that emotional distress was something to be treated, not just endured or punished. Though modern antidepressants are synthesized in laboratories, their philosophical ancestors were born of roots, rituals, and a human longing for light in the dark. Ayurvedic medicine too has long addressed emotional well-being. Depression-like symptoms were considered imbalances in the doshas, particularly vata and kapha, with herbal treatments like ashwagandha prescribed to restore balance. Though not true antidepressants by modern standards, these practices marked the beginning of humanity's long journey towards psychopharmacology. Chapter 2: Accidental Discoveries and the Birth of Modern Antidepressants. Sometimes, the most transformative scientific breakthroughs arise from sheer accident. Such is the case with antidepressants. Their origins are tangled not in psychiatry, but in the treatment of other diseases, particularly tuberculosis and schizophrenia. In the early 1950s, researchers at Seaview Hospital in Staten Island were testing a new drug called iproniazid on tuberculosis patients. The drug was a derivative of isonicotinonic acid hydrozide, and it was initially designed to combat the Mycobacterium tuberculosis bacterium. But doctors began noticing something unusual. Patients who had been despondent and withdrawn were suddenly sociable, animated, even euphoric. These unexpected behavioural changes caught the attention of psychiatrists. Iproniazid was soon tested on depressed patients, and similar mood-elevating effects were observed. The medical community had, quite by accident, stumbled upon one of the first monoamine oxidase inhibitors, MAOIs, a class of antidepressants that work by blocking the enzyme that breaks down key neurotransmitters like serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. Around the same time in Switzerland, researchers were working with a class of compounds derived from antihistamines. They synthesized a compound known as imipramine, which they tested for schizophrenia. It did little to alleviate psychotic symptoms, but once again, an unintentional benefit appeared. The drug had a notable impact on mood. Patients became less withdrawn, more hopeful. Imipramine would go on to become the first tricyclic antidepressant, TCA, another major class of mood-altering drugs. These two discoveries, emerging from wholly unrelated treatments, opened the door to a new era in psychiatry. For the first time, doctors had pharmacological tools that directly targeted the biochemical underpinnings of depression. Though at the time, the full mechanisms were still poorly understood. The success of these early drugs sparked a pharmaceutical gold rush. Companies began developing and patenting derivatives, experimenting with different chemical structures to maximize efficacy and minimize side effects. This led to the establishment of the first wave of antidepressants used in clinical psychiatry. But these early drugs had problems. MAOIs, for example, could cause dangerous interactions with certain foods, like cheese and wine, leading to spikes in blood pressure known as hypertensive crises. Tricyclics, though effective, carried a risk of cardiac toxicity and had sedative effects that made them unpleasant for some patients. These limitations spurred scientists to search for a more refined solution, and in 1987 that solution arrived in the form of fluoxetine, better known by its brand name Prozac. Prozac was the first of a new generation of antidepressants, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs. These drugs work not by blocking enzymes, but by preventing the reabsorption or reuptake of serotonin in the brain, allowing more of it to remain active in synaptic spaces. The development of SSRIs marked a paradigm shift. They were safer, better tolerated, and less likely to cause dangerous interactions. Public awareness of depression soared. For the first time, conversations around mental health moved from whispers in the dark to headlines in mainstream culture. The story of antidepressants, then, is not just one of science, but of serendipity. A tuberculosis drug and a failed schizophrenia medication led us to one of the most profound tools in the fight against depression. These discoveries would forever alter how we understand, diagnose, and treat mental illness. Chapter 3: Types of Antidepressants and Their Mechanisms. Understanding how antidepressants function begins with understanding how they are categorized. Not all antidepressants work the same way. In fact, they span several distinct classes, each with its own mechanism of action, therapeutic profile, and side effects spectrum. Let's begin with an overview of the most common categories. 1. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs. SSRIs are by far the most commonly prescribed antidepressants today. Popular examples include fluoxetine, Prozac, sertraline, Zoloft, citalopram, Celexa, and escitalopram, Lexapro. How they work. SSRIs block the serotonin transporter, SERT, on presynaptic neurons. This transporter is responsible for reabsorbing serotonin from the synaptic cleft. By inhibiting this reuptake process, SSRIs increase the concentration of serotonin available to bind to postsynaptic receptors, theoretically improving mood and reducing anxiety. Biological analogy. Think of serotonin like a text message. Normally, it's sent across the synaptic gap and then cleared away by the sender. SSRIs prevent the message from being deleted too soon, giving the receiving neuron more time to read the signal. Side effects. Common side effects include nausea, headache, sexual dysfunction, and paradoxically increased anxiety in the first few weeks. It typically takes 2 to 6 weeks to observe therapeutic effects. Why they're popular, SSRIs are generally safer in overdose, have fewer dietary restrictions, and are well tolerated. 2. Serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, SNRIs. SNRIs include medications like venlafaxine, Effexor, duloxetine, Cymbalta, and desvenlafaxine, Pristiq. Mechanism. These drugs block both the serotonin transporter, SERT, and the norepinephrine transporter, NET, increasing the availability of both neurotransmitters in the brain. Clinical rationale. While serotonin is associated with mood regulation and anxiety, norepinephrine contributes to alertness, energy, and focus. By targeting both, SNRIs are often used not only for depression, but also for chronic pain and fatigue-related disorders. Side effects. These can include increased blood pressure, agitation, insomnia, and sweating. Like SSRIs, therapeutic effects can take weeks to become evident. 3. Tricyclic antidepressants, TCAs. Some well-known TCAs include amitriptyline, nortriptyline, and clomipramine. Mechanism. TCAs inhibit the reuptake of serotonin and norepinephrine, much like SNRIs. However, they also block a variety of other receptors, including histaminergic, cholinergic, and adrenergic receptors. Why they work and why they don't always. The non-selective action of TCAs makes them powerful, but also prone to numerous side effects such as drowsiness, dry mouth, blurred vision, constipation, and heart rhythm disturbances. Clinical use. Today, though largely replaced by newer antidepressants, TCAs are still used in treatment-resistant depression, chronic pain syndromes, and obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD. 4. Monoamine oxidase inhibitors, MAOIs. Examples include phenelzine, Nardil, tranylcypromine, Parnate, and selegiline, MSAM patch. Mechanism. MAOIs inhibit the monoamine oxidase enzyme, which breaks down serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine in the brain. This increases the levels of these mood-related neurotransmitters. Unique risk profile. Mayo eyes can interact with tyramine-rich foods like aged cheese, wine, and cured meats, causing hypertensive crises. Due to these risks, they're often reserved for treatment-resistant cases. Relevance. Today, despite being one of the oldest classes, MAOIs remain important for patients who do not respond to other treatments. 5. Atypical antidepressants. These are a diverse group that don't fit neatly into other categories. They include bupropion, Wellbutrin, inhibits the reuptake of norepinephrine and dopamine, often used in patients experiencing fatigue or sexual dysfunction from SSRIs. Mirtazapine, Remeron, increases norepinephrine and serotonin release by blocking presynaptic alpha-2 receptors. It's sedating and often used in patients with insomnia. Trazodone, often used off-label for sleep, a weak serotonin reuptake inhibitor with antihistaminic effects. Flexibility. These medications are often used in combination with others, or chosen when a patient presents with specific symptoms like insomnia or anxiety. 6. NMDA receptor antagonists, a new frontier. Recently, drugs like ketamine and esketamine, Spravato, have emerged as fast-acting antidepressants. Mechanism. Unlike traditional antidepressants, these drugs act on the glutamatergic system by antagonizing NMDA receptors. This leads to a cascade of changes in synaptic plasticity and increased levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. Clinical use. Ketamine is administered intravenously, while esketamine is a nasal spray. Both are used in treatment-resistant depression and have shown rapid results, sometimes within hours. Implications. This represents a paradigm shift, moving from monoamines to targeting neural plasticity itself. There are some philosophical considerations. Carl Jung believed that depression was a woman in black, knocking at your door with something important to say. Modern pharmacology might offer a way to silence her, but Jung would ask, what if we listened instead? Philosophers and psychiatrists have long debated whether numbing pain is always the best course of action. William James wrote that suffering can be a crucible of character formation. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and founder of logotherapy, emphasized that meaning, not happiness, was the deepest human pursuit. In this chapter we have explored the armamentarium of antidepressants, but with a mindful acknowledgement, medication may be a path but not the destination. These drugs primarily target neurotransmitter systems in the brain. But what are neurotransmitters, and how do they shape our emotional landscape? Chapter 4. The role of neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and beyond. To understand how antidepressants work, one must first grasp the orchestra of neurotransmitters that coordinate human emotion, thought, and perception. Just as an imbalance in a symphony can ruin the music, so too can a disruption in brain chemistry unsettle the harmony of the mind. Antidepressants aim to restore this balance. But what exactly are they adjusting? The basics of neurotransmission. Neurotransmitters are the chemical messengers of the brain. They allow neurons to communicate across the tiny gaps, synapses, that separate them. A neurotransmitter is released from the presynaptic neuron into the synaptic cleft, binds to receptors on the postsynaptic neuron, and either excites or inhibits further electrical signaling. After this communication, the neurotransmitter is either reabsorbed, reuptake, broken down by enzymes, or diffuses away. Let us now delve into the primary players in the antidepressant narrative. Serotonin, 5-HT, the mood stabilizer. Serotonin is perhaps the most well-known neurotransmitter associated with depression. Biological role: it influences mood, sleep, appetite, digestion, memory, and sexual desire. Roughly 90% of the body's serotonin is found in the gastrointestinal tract, though it's the 10% in the brain that captures psychiatric interest. The serotonin hypothesis. For decades, low levels of serotonin have been linked to depression. This led to the development of SSRIs and the mainstream belief that depression is a chemical imbalance. Scientific nuance. Recent studies have questioned whether serotonin deficiency alone causes depression. Some depressed individuals have normal serotonin levels, and serotonin manipulation doesn't always lead to predictable emotional responses. Still, the efficacy of SSRIs in many patients implies that serotonin plays a modulatory role, possibly regulating how the brain responds to emotional information rather than determining mood directly. Philosophical reflection. Jung might argue that serotonin doesn't cause depression, but perhaps buffers the psyche's descent into it, like a net that catches the falling ego before it hits the unconscious abyss. Norepinephrine, NE, the energy booster. Also known as noradrenaline, norepinephrine governs attention, arousal, and the fight-or-flight response. Functions. It enhances alertness, promotes vigilance, increases heart rate and blood flow, and is crucial for responding to stress. In depression, a deficiency in norepinephrine may manifest as lack of energy, reduced interest in life, poor concentration, and slowed psychomotor function. Drugs like SNRIs and TCAs help elevate norepinephrine levels. Interaction with antidepressants. By blocking norepinephrine reuptake, antidepressants boost synaptic concentrations, improving motivation and drive. Key symptoms often resistant to serotonin-targeting drugs alone. Clinical insight. Some patients describe their response to norepinephrine-enhancing drugs as waking up after a long internal sleep. Dopamine, DA, the reward messenger. Dopamine regulates the brain's reward and pleasure centers. It influences motivation, attention, motor control, and reinforcement learning. In depression, low dopamine levels have been linked to anhedonia, the inability to experience pleasure. This symptom is particularly resistant to SSRIs, leading researchers to explore dopamine's role in more severe or atypical depression. Pharmacological interventions. Bupropion, Wellbutrin, is a notable antidepressant that enhances dopamine and norepinephrine without significantly affecting serotonin. It's often used when fatigue, low motivation, or sexual dysfunction are prominent. Emerging research. There is increasing interest in targeting the mesolimbic pathway, the brain's reward circuit, to address depression-related apathy and numbness. Jungian thought. From an archetypal perspective, dopamine might reflect the hero's journey, the drive to act, to achieve, to find meaning. When dopamine falters, the inner hero sleeps. Glutamate and GABA, the balance between excitation and inhibition. Glutamate, the most abundant excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain. It plays a critical role in neuroplasticity, memory, and learning. Overactivation can cause excitotoxicity, neuronal damage from excessive stimulation. GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. It calms neuronal activity, promotes relaxation, and counterbalances the excitatory action of glutamate. Ketamine's role. As mentioned earlier, ketamine acts on the glutamatergic system, not monoamines. By modulating NMDA receptors, it increases synaptic plasticity and rapidly reverses depressive symptoms. Implications. This suggests depression may involve dysfunctional neuroplasticity, an inability of the brain to adapt, form new connections, or recover from stress. This is a radical shift from the simplistic chemical imbalance model. Quote, Dr. Carlos Zarate, a leading ketamine researcher at the NIH, stated, "Depression may not be about serotonin levels at all, but about the brain's failure to adapt and change." Brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, the growth fertilizer. BDNF is a protein that supports the survival of existing neurons and encourages the growth of new ones. Neurogenesis. In depression, chronic stress reduces BDNF levels, particularly in the hippocampus, a brain region involved in memory and emotion. This shrinkage may contribute to cognitive fog, memory issues, and emotional blunting. Antidepressant. Connection. Many antidepressants over time increase BDNF levels. Ketamine appears to do this much faster, offering hope for rapid recovery. Philosophical parallel. BDNF might be viewed as the brain's spiritual gardener, pruning, watering, and renewing the soil of the self. Receptor sensitivity and downregulation. Antidepressants don't simply increase neurotransmitter levels. Over time, they lead to changes in receptor density and sensitivity. For instance, chronic SSRI use downregulates certain serotonin receptors like 5-HT1A, which may be part of the delayed therapeutic effect. Neuroplastic changes emerge after several weeks, suggesting antidepressants restructure how neurons connect and communicate. Long-term view. Depression may be less about a shortage of chemicals and more about a rigid, maladaptive system of connections. Antidepressants, by loosening these rigid patterns, offer the brain a second chance to grow. Chapter Reflection: The Orchestra of the Mind. Imagine the mind as a symphony. Serotonin sets the tempo, dopamine strikes the melody, norepinephrine beats the rhythm, glutamate excites the crescendos, and GABA soothes the pauses. When depression strikes, the conductor falters, the instruments drift out of tune. Antidepressants may not be the composer, but they help the orchestra find its rhythm again. Jung reminds us, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Yet in that pain lies the opportunity for the new music. Chapter 5. The Evolution of Antidepressant Treatments Through History. To truly appreciate modern antidepressants, we must trace the arc of their evolution through history, a journey shaped by serendipity, scientific breakthroughs, changing worldviews, and the slow, stubborn unraveling of the human mind. Ancient views of depression, the melancholia of antiquity. Before neuroscience, the experience we now call depression was interpreted through metaphysical, religious, or humoral frameworks. The Greeks and Romans, Hippocrates, often considered the father of medicine, coined the term melancholia, meaning black bile. In his humoral theory, an excess of this fluid led to sorrow, fear, and despondency. Aristotle believed melancholic individuals were often deeply creative and philosophical. He did not medicalize sadness so much as associate it with reflection and genius. The Middle Ages. In Christian Europe, melancholia was often equated with spiritual failure or demonic possession. Treatment came through prayer, fasting, confession, or even exorcism. It was less a chemical imbalance than a moral or spiritual crisis. Islamic Golden Age. Scholars like Avicenna, Ibn Sina, and Al-Razi wrote extensively on melancholia, treating it with herbs, music, talk therapy, and lifestyle modification. Their holistic approaches foreshadowed modern biopsychosocial models. The birth of modern psychiatry, 18th and 19th century. With the Enlightenment came new paradigms. Physicians like Philippe Pinel in France began to treat mentally ill patients with compassion, advocating for humane institutions rather than prisons. Kraepelin's classification, Emil Kraepelin in the late 19th century differentiated manic depressive illness from schizophrenia, laying the groundwork for modern diagnostic systems. Yet treatment remained rudimentary. Sedatives, rest cures, and asylums dominated Freud and the psychoanalytic lens. Freud reframed depression as mourning gone awry. In Mourning and Melancholia, he suggested that internalized anger, unconscious loss, and repressed desires manifested as self-directed aggression. Though his methods lacked empirical rigor, Freud offered a narrative structure to suffering which resonated deeply with patients. Jung's perspective. Carl Jung saw depression not as an illness to eradicate, but a summons from the unconscious. It was a necessary winter, a descent that might precede spiritual rebirth. Rather than medicating it away, he urged dialogue with the shadow, the repressed, unlived parts of the self. This early split between biochemical correction and psychological meaning still echoes in today's debates over antidepressants. The first antidepressants, Serendipity and Science, 1950s, 1960s. Modern antidepressants were born not from targeted research into mood, but from chance observations during unrelated drug trials. Iproniazid and the birth of MAOIs. In the 1950s, a tuberculosis medication called iproniazid was observed to elevate patients' mood and activity levels. Researchers realized it inhibited monoamine oxidase, an enzyme that breaks down serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. This discovery gave rise to the first class of antidepressants, monoamine oxidase inhibitors, MAOIs. Though effective, they came with serious dietary restrictions and potentially fatal interactions with certain foods and medications. Imipramine and the tricyclics. Another accidental breakthrough occurred when imipramine, a drug being tested for schizophrenia, failed in that population but lifted depressive symptoms. It became the prototype for tricyclic antidepressants, TCAs, which block the reuptake of serotonin and norepinephrine. TCAs were more effective than MAOIs and became widely used, though they carried risks: sedation, weight gain, cardiovascular issues, and toxicity in overdose. The SSRI revolution, 1980s, 1990s. In 1987, fluoxetine, better known as Prozac, was approved by the FDA. It marked a watershed moment in psychiatric history. Why SSRIs took over. Fewer side effects compared to TCAs or MAOIs, safer in overdose, aggressively marketed, fit the emerging chemical imbalance narrative. SSRIs selectively inhibit the reuptake of serotonin, thereby increasing its availability in the synaptic cleft. Over time, this led to changes in receptor sensitivity and mood stabilization. Cultural impact. Prozac became a symbol of the 1990s, hailed as a miracle drug, criticized as a shortcut, and discussed endlessly in media, art, and academia. Peter Kramer's book Listening to Prozac raised ethical questions. If a drug not only lifted depression, but made people feel better than well, was it therapy or enhancement? Backlash and limits. Placebo-controlled studies showed that SSRIs had only modest advantages over placebo in mild to moderate depression. They often took weeks to work. Emotional blunting and sexual dysfunction were common. Still, for many patients, SSRIs offered the first glimpse of relief. Expanding the arsenal, SNRIs, atypicals, and beyond 2000s present. These drugs, for example venlafaxine, duloxetine, affect both serotonin and norepinephrine reuptake, offering broader symptom relief, especially in cases of fatigue or pain. Atypical antidepressants. Bupropion increases dopamine and norepinephrine, often used when anhedonia or low energy are key. Mirtazapine. works on serotonin and norepinephrine but via different receptors, often used for insomnia and appetite loss. Ketamine and esketamine. These rapid-acting drugs target the glutamate system. Their ability to relieve suicidal thoughts within hours has transformed emergency psychiatry. Psychedelic research. Compounds like psilocybin, magic mushrooms, and MDMA, ecstasy, are being studied for treatment-resistant depression and PTSD. They work not by daily administration, but by triggering intense, transformative psychological experiences. Digital psychiatry. App-based CBT, AI-driven therapy, and mood tracking platforms are now part of the expanding landscape of depression treatment. The future of antidepressant development. Biomarker-based treatment. Researchers are searching for genetic, inflammatory, or brain imaging markers to better match patients with the right antidepressant. An approach called precision psychiatry. Neuroplasticity and inflammation. Emerging theories suggest depression is less about chemical deficits and more about maladaptive wiring and chronic inflammation. Non-pharmacological interventions. Vagus nerve stimulation. Transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS. Deep brain stimulation. These offer alternatives for those who don't respond to medication. Chapter Reflection. A continuing odyssey. The history of antidepressants is a story of trial, error, miracle and mystery. From black bile to SSRIs, from Freud to functional MRI scans, we have circled around the suffering mind like pilgrims, each era offering new metaphors and medicines. Jung reminds us, the shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases. Likewise, there is no one antidepressant for all depressions. But each chapter brings us closer, not to a cure, perhaps, but to a more nuanced map of the inner world. Chapter 6. Testing, Approval and Monitoring. Before an antidepressant reaches the pharmacy shelf, it undergoes a rigorous process. Preclinical testing, animal studies to assess toxicity, absorption and efficacy. Phase 1 trials, small-scale tests on healthy volunteers to determine safety and dosage. Phase 2 trials, conducted on a small group of patients to assess effectiveness and side effects. Phase 3 trials, large-scale randomized controlled trials, RCTs, often involving thousands of participants across multiple sites. The FDA or similar regulatory bodies in other countries evaluate the data. A drug must demonstrate statistical superiority over a placebo and acceptable safety profiles to gain approval. Even after approval, post-marketing surveillance, Phase 4, continues, watching for rare side effects, long-term risks and drug interactions. It's a lengthy, expensive, and ethically intricate process, but essential for ensuring both efficacy and safety. Chapter 7. Psychological, Spiritual and Cultural Perspectives on Antidepressant Use. Antidepressants, though biochemical tools, do not exist in a vacuum. Their use is woven into a rich tapestry of personal identity, cultural narratives, spiritual dilemmas, and philosophical inquiry. To fully appreciate the landscape of antidepressant treatment, one must examine not only the molecules involved, but also the minds and societies that receive them. This chapter delves into the psychological experiences of antidepressant users, the spiritual implications of altering one's mood pharmaceutically, and the cultural debates that surround these medications. The psychology of taking antidepressants. 1. Hope, stigma, and relief. For many individuals, starting an antidepressant represents a moment of hope, often after months or years of despair. The simple act of taking a pill can offer validation that their suffering is real and treatable. But ambivalence is common. Internalized stigma may whisper that taking medication means I'm weak, or I should be able to fix this on my own. In therapy rooms across the globe, clinicians have seen patients wrestle with shame, confusion, and relief in equal measure. 2. Identity and the true self. Some patients report feeling not like themselves on medication. Others feel like the drugs return them to their true self, the self they were before depression. This raises age-old questions about authenticity. Who am I when I am medicated? Is happiness that comes from a pill less authentic than happiness born from life circumstances? These psychological tensions have inspired memoirs, philosophical essays, and ongoing clinical discussions. They are not easily resolved, but they are important. 3. Emotional flattening and the cost of stability. A common side effect of SSRIs is emotional blunting. Some patients describe feeling less sadness, but also less joy, passion, or love. This numbness can feel like trading the sharp edges of pain for a fog of neutrality. Is a peaceful numbness better than intense suffering? Or is it simply another form of alienation? 2. Spiritual perspectives on mood and medication. 1. The religious response to suffering. In many religious traditions, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, suffering is not only expected, but often viewed as spiritually meaningful. Trials purify the soul, despair deepens compassion, pain brings one closer to God. From this lens, altering mood with medication might be seen as interfering with divine will. Others may view healing through medicine as a gift from God. Both views coexist within religious communities. 2. Carl Jung, The Psyche's Dark Night. Carl Jung believed that depression could represent the psyche's attempt to withdraw from external distractions and force the individual inward. In this descent, one confronts the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny or repress. To Jung, depression was not merely a symptom to be medicated away, it is a call to transformation. He warned that suppressing this inner work with medication could interfere with individuation, the process of becoming fully oneself. Still, Jung was not anti-medication. He emphasized discernment. Sometimes the descent is too dangerous or overwhelming, and medication may be necessary to keep the individual afloat long enough to do the deeper work. 3. The role of consciousness and soul. Psychoanalysts and spiritual thinkers alike have questioned the impact of antidepressants on consciousness itself. Can a chemically induced serenity bypass the inner struggle necessary for soul growth? Or does it offer the peace needed to reflect and awaken more fully? This tension between transformation through suffering and relief through medicine has no easy answers. It is deeply personal, shaped by one's worldview and life experience. 3. Cultural attitudes and global perspectives. 1. Western medical model versus traditional healing. In many Western countries, antidepressants are mainstream, promoted by pharmaceutical companies, prescribed by general practitioners, and endorsed by mental health organizations. But in many other cultures, traditional healing methods remain dominant. Herbal medicine, community rituals, spiritual cleansing, ancestor veneration. In some indigenous cultures, depression is not a disorder but a sign of spiritual imbalance or disconnection from one's lineage. Antidepressants may be viewed as superficial, ignoring the deeper social or spiritual roots of suffering. 2. The rise of cosmetic psychiatry. A growing concern in modern societies is the use of antidepressants not just to treat clinical depression, but to enhance performance, increase emotional resilience, or dull existential unease. Some psychiatrists warn of a slippery slope, where sadness becomes pathologized and medication becomes a tool for conformity. Philosopher Carl Elliott called this trend cosmetic psychopharmacology, the use of drugs to alter personality in culturally desirable ways. This raises ethical questions. Are we medicating people to help them or to make them easier to manage? What do we lose when we smooth out the rough edges of human emotion? 3. The role of capitalism and pharmaceutical marketing critics argue that antidepressants are deeply embedded in capitalist structures. Pharmaceutical companies fund much of the research. Aggressive marketing can shape public perception. Insurance policies often favour medication over therapy. The result is a system that may overprescribe drugs, especially in under-resourced settings. Some scholars view this as medicalising distress, treating structural problems like poverty, racism, or trauma with individual pills, and yet many patients report that these very pills saved their lives. IV, case studies and personal testimonies. 1. Eleanor, the Spirit and the Pill. A 38-year-old Catholic woman from Mexico describes her struggle with depression as both spiritual and physical. Prayer brought comfort but not relief. After reluctantly trying sertraline, she said, "It didn't take away God. It gave me the strength to seek him again." 2. Tariq, reconciling faith and medication. A devout Muslim man from Egypt initially resisted antidepressants, fearing they implied a lack of trust in Allah. But after a near-suicide attempt, he began taking fluoxetine. "Now I believe Allah sent me this medicine," he says. Healing comes in many forms. 3. Emily, the Flattening. An artist in New York described her SSRI experience as a colour drain. Though no longer crying every day, she couldn't paint, laugh, or feel romantic love. She ultimately stopped the medication and pursued intensive psychotherapy instead. Each story reveals a different path and different lessons. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. Chapter Reflection: Integrating the Inner and Outer Worlds. Antidepressants do not just alter brain chemistry, they touch identity, spirituality, community, and culture. Their effects ripple far beyond synapses. Whether seen as lifelines, crutches, spiritual obstacles, or tools of liberation, they demand nuance. In honouring both their power and their limits, we can begin to chart a more compassionate and comprehensive approach to healing. Chapter 8: Side Effects, Controversies, and the Placebo Effect. No medication is without risk. Common antidepressant side effects include nausea, weight gain, insomnia, sexual dysfunction, emotional blunting. More severe risks include increased suicidal ideation in young adults, prompting black box warnings, and withdrawal symptoms upon stopping, known as discontinuation syndrome. Controversies include effectiveness debates. Some meta-analyses suggest antidepressants offer only modest improvements over placebos in mild to moderate depression. Overprescription. Critics argue antidepressants are sometimes prescribed without addressing root causes like trauma or stress. Industry influence. Concerns exist about pharmaceutical companies selectively publishing positive studies. Still, for many, these medications are life-changing or even life-saving, and the placebo effect, patients improving simply because they believe they're being treated, reminds us how powerful the mind-body connection truly is. Chapter 9: Antidepressants versus Therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, psychodynamic therapy, and mindfulness-based approaches all offer effective alternatives or complements to medication. Research shows that combining antidepressants with therapy often produces the best outcomes, especially for moderate to severe depression. Where antidepressants address biological symptoms, therapy helps reframe thoughts, manage behaviors, and resolve emotional pain. Therapy also avoids side effects and can empower patients with lifelong coping tools. Yet it requires time, motivation, and often access to trained professionals, which is not always available. Chapter 10: The Future of Antidepressant Treatment. As neuroscience evolves, so does the hope for faster, more targeted, and more effective antidepressants. Emerging directions include rapid-acting agents, like ketamine and its derivative esketamine, which can relieve depression symptoms in hours. Psychedelic therapy. Compounds like psilocybin are being studied for treatment-resistant depression. Precision psychiatry, using genetics and biomarkers to match patients with the most effective treatments. Digital therapeutics, app-based cognitive training, VR environments and biofeedback. Ultimately, the future of antidepressants may lie not just in chemistry, but in integration blending medication, therapy, lifestyle change, and personalized science. Conclusion: a compassionate science. Antidepressants are not magical elixirs, but neither are they placebos. They are tools, imperfect, powerful, evolving. They represent decades of effort to understand the brain's darkest seasons. And in that effort lies a deeper truth, that even in despair, we search for hope. That science at its best is an act of compassion. Thank you for joining this journey on the Sleepless Academic. May your mind be curious and your rest peaceful. Sleep easy.